Hi, everyone. Good evening. Great to see you all for the live tasting of Power and Passion, the wines of Cleopatra, Ancient Wines Club 30, number 36. Kind of getting old here as an organization, it seems like. Um, so as with all of our topics, this is one we've been kind of dancing around for a while. It comes up in conversation quite a lot, at least among us sorts of people, comes up in conversation a lot. And this is cool for us, for me and Dana personally, because we both spent a lot of time in Egypt. Dana a lot more than I have, but both have done excavation there and in various places. And I think Dana said he would spend over 2 years there altogether. Um, obviously Cleopatra is an extremely important figure in Greco-Roman Egypt, but also just kind of in the overall mythology of the place and its history. So really cool to kind of finally get a chance to dive in here. So we're going to taste you through four wines that were featured in the club, along with two special offer wines, which I think more people actually signed up for the special offer wines this time than we've ever had before. So many of you will have those in hand as well. We'll get to them at the end. Um, and we will, as usual, we'll take some questions at the end. If you have anything that kind of comes up while we're going through the presentation, just go ahead and throw it into the chat, and either Dana or T will either kind of respond by typing there, or they'll take a note of the question. We can kind of get to it at some of the breaks in the program. So is everyone on? If everyone wouldn't mind muting their microphone, sometimes we get folks who will come in with the mic on and it makes a noise, but I think we're all good. Um, let's see, we already have a chat. T's chatting. Okay, let me close that out. All right, so without further ado, I'm gonna move to our first slide, which actually a little bit different tonight. So we thought we might actually have on the call our good friend Arania Margamenu, with whom we did the Ancient Wines tour this past March. Doesn't look like she's joined yet. If she does join, it'll be all the way from Greece. So, but anyway, we wanted to make a bit of a save the date announcement. Nothing's definite yet, but we're hoping to get back over there this upcoming summer. So about 11 months from now, 10 plus months from now in July. So these are kind of the dates that work the best for her with her schedule and with our schedule. And if we do it, it's going to be a northern Greece focused trip, which would be, I think, really exciting for those of us in the group who haven't been to that region. So kind of basing out of Thessaloniki and visiting a lot of the sites that are connected with Zeus and the gods of northern Greece, as well as some of the historical figures like Alexander the Great, Philip of Macedon, and there's a lot of Roman battle sites up there as well. So all sorts of interesting things that we can do. And speaking for myself, at least, I actually prefer the wines of that region. I love the wines of the rest of Greece, but there's a lot of really cool Xenomavro and other interesting wines up in the north. So, T and or Dana, did you want to add anything to the kind of conversation here?
No, just other than Arani is a familiar name to a bunch of people on this call, and I was really bummed to not join the last tour, but looking forward to being on the next one. And with Arani at the helm, alongside your faithful compatriots on this call, we're excited to have this in the works. So yeah, just keep your eyes open.
Yep. So we'll move on from there to first wine of the evening. So hopefully, if you don't have this in your glass yet, now's the time. Uh, so Dana, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, happy to. And good evening, everybody. Really great to be joining you. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a little bit of a cold coming on, and you might see me drinking from this bottle. This is a water bottle. This is actually the Krenko that some of you are familiar with. I get in trouble with this when I drink water at work because people are like, are you okay?" I'm like, "It's water. It's okay." Anyway, we'll jump right into it. This wine, this is our 2022 Donna Fagata Legea. Legea actually is taken from the Giuseppe Lampedusa, the novel of the same name that he wrote in 1952. Legea is a siren, and this the story is an interesting one. It's very similar to Lampedusa's The Leopard. If you guys have read this, it's all about aging Sicilians who are priming. They're they're looking back and they're pining for their their better days and beauty and health. And so for me, this has, I know nothing about this. This has no resonance at all. But it definitely kind of fits into this wine in particular. This grape is 100% Zebibo. I know we get to say all these fun things with this wine, right? Donna Fugata, we get to say Zebibo. Better known, however, by its actual classification, which is Muscat of Alexandria, which of course is, as Jeff was saying, Cleopatra's hometown. This particular type of Muscat, Muscat of Alexandria, is a true ancient vine. A lot of times we're talking about varietals and styles that have connections to the ancient world. Genetically, Muscat of Alexandria is actually one of the oldest unmodified grapes in existence. So it's got these origins in North Africa, and we know that it was actually developed in places like the Fayum in Egypt, where Egyptians cultivated it. Does very well in hot, arid environments, hence it, doing well there in places like the Fayum, where Jeff actually worked for some time. Jeff and I often laugh about some of the wines that are currently made in the Fayum, called like a Cru de Ptolemy. And that's right up there with Cleopatra, who was a Ptolemy, and we'll talk about her a little bit more in a moment. And so this is a grape that actually Cleopatra would have tasted. Interestingly, sources tell us, though, that she did not drink local wine. She actually drank wine from offsite. So her Muscat of Alexandria actually came from the island of Lemnos. So hey, royalty gets to do what royalty wants to do. Um, and this wine particularly is not from Lemnos, but this is from Pantelleria, Italy, which is a small island to the the southwest of Sicily. And for that reason, it's really a fantastic environment for this grape to grow. It's a hot climate because this grape is actually susceptible to mildew. So it really benefits from those arid Mediterranean environments, these rocky places. High in sugars, and as a result, it's typically used for sweet wines. You find a lot of Muscat of Alexandria that ends up in wine styles like, say, Portuguese Vino Moscatelle, or Vino Moscatel rather. But this is actually a very dry wine, which is really fantastic. It's got quite a bit. It still retains, even though it's a dry style, a lot of those notes of lemons, fresh tangerine, orange blossoms, and has this medium body texture that really kind of carries through. It's crisp, has good acidity, and again, this is coming from a volcanic environment. Those of you who remember our wines of our volcano club some time ago, right? We talked about the minerality that may or may not be imparted by these soils. Definitely sandy, rocky soils coming from a highly volcanic environment. And there is a distinct kind of fresh minerality on the palate, on the finish. So we really love this wine. It's fermented 2 months in steel tanks and then 3 months in the bottle. And some of these wines at Donna Fogata, the producer, go back over 100 years. Dona Vegata itself is a small production operation, 5 generations of winemakers, storied past it's been in the Rallo family since 1851. And they really have a real focus on art and culture and sustainability, and also really, really strong female winemakers. They've done a lot of work about women in what is typically, as we know, a very male dominated space, particularly in Europe. Um, some of the folks like Gabriele Rallo have received the honor, the Commendatore d'Italia. And so when we're talking about strong women, like this club really is centered on, like Cleopatra, there's a lot of fitting connections with this wine. So yeah, we really enjoy this, and we can kind of move on to the next slide. We're bouncing around. We don't have Ryan with us tonight, so it's the three of us holding down the fort. And just to kind of talk a little bit about the genesis of this club. Yes, as as Jeff was saying, Cleopatra, as a topic, as an icon, as a historical figure, really, all the way up to the latest Netflix movie, right? Queen Cleopatra, she still engenders all of this controversy and discussion. So, I think we planned to do this club before that came out. We always laugh because as soon as we plan a club, something comes out, and we're like, oh, who's spying on us? Anyway, Cleopatra though holds her own, and as a character and a historical figure, is really unique. The city of Alexandria, of course, as Jeff mentioned, we both spent quite a long time there. I'd say also, as a descendant of the Ptolemies, Cleopatra kind of shows up on the scene in 69 BCE. She's the descendant of Ptolemy the 12th, so it gives you a sense of right after the death of Alexander. To put it in just some quick historical context, Alexander dies. He's taken over most of the Mediterranean. His empire stretches all the way to India. Empire falls about. His general Ptolemy takes over, and then right a succession of leaders, the Ptolemaic dynasty. Um, Cleopatra is the daughter of Ptolemy the 12th, and steps into this very fraught environment where they're trying to essentially maintain their autonomy in the face of a tremendous amount of pressure coming from Rome. And Jeff will talk about that more a little bit later. Um, one quick fun note. I've mentioned this, I think, maybe on other ones, but my time in Alexandria was with Dr. John Swanson, who was my tutor at the American University of Cairo. And one of the things he really liked doing was going to this space where based on records, based on archaeological evidence, he's pretty clear. Like he has a theory as to where Alexander's tomb is, where Ptolemy actually buried the body of Alexander in the city, and he's pretty convinced it's under a Baskin and Robbins 31 flavors, which is in downtown Alexandria. And so he took us there for ice cream way back in the day, and he would always say, he's like, I think if Alexander was alive today, he would truly enjoy mint chip, and he'd pour some on the pavement out to Alexander. So, anyway, I know I've told that story a million times, but yeah, it's a place near and dear to us. And with that, we can move on to our next wine.
Thanks,
Keep it in.
Dana, for that very delicious introduction. I don't know. I actually don't know that I've heard that version. I mean, I've heard the version of where he thought it was burnt, buried, but I don't know. I don't think I
Oh,
heard the mint chip
the,
twist.
the libation to Alexander was always a
Yeah.
key part of
Okay.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe I just didn't remember the flavor, but nice.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
mint chip. That's John
Um.
Swanson favorite. So.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember that part of it. So we're as Dana mentioned, we're jumping around a little bit. Also, oftentimes with the write-ups, we'll have the wine extremely closely correlated with the stories. But as he also mentioned, the sort of availability of palatable Egyptian wine is, let's say, limited, as amazing as Egypt is in so many other ways. They haven't the modern wine industry hasn't quite gotten to the point where we want to be featuring their wines in our club. So we kind of took a tour around the Mediterranean world, to places that are connected with Cleopatra in other ways, not just Alexandria or Egypt specifically. So this wine here, the 2021 Zoinos winery, Epiloges, is from Zitza, which is actually a sub-region of Epirus in the kind of, I guess you could call it, depending which part of Greece you're in, but far west. So I guess it's sort of north, not in the Peloponnese. And it's the grape is Dabina, so 100% Dabina. So I don't know if we featured a Dabina before. We've had a couple of grapes from this region, from Epirus more generally in the past, from the grape Vlahico, which we really love. So it's an extremely mountainous region. I mean, that's not saying that much in Greece. Most of Greece is extremely mountainous, but really steep slopes. And it's grown this one on about, I think it's at like 700 meters of elevation, so well over 2,000 feet. And we really like this one. I think my ancient Greek is better than my modern Greek, but I think epilogue is like selection or choice, if I remember rightly. So I'm assuming that it's the same word. We need Aranya here to correct me, but if it's
It's
not,
not the
that's what I that's kind of what I took from the title. So yeah, we really enjoyed this one. I think if we taste it, we kind of get a sense of the place of it. So it's got really interesting. It's got really good body to it. I would say like kind of has a full body, full mouthfeel, but then a really kind of high pitched acidity to it as well. So it's kind of a nice mixture of those two things. We got a lot of we were tasting it. We got a lot of different kinds of pear in it. Some kind of maybe a little bit of underripe peach, a lot of citrus, some floral, and then I got really like a lot of herbal qualities to this wine. So like thyme, sage, oregano, things like that. Which I as you're kind of connecting the wine to the place, this is a region which is really known for that sort of thing as well in the cuisine. So kind of just we always kind of go back and forth with what you pair this with. And I was like, yeah, like a white fish,
Mhm.
with some like a sage crusted white fish or maybe some cod with thyme on it, something like that would go really well. I think it's a very accessible wine that also has some nice complexity and we love the price too for this one. So, and then the connection here, kind of get back to the story a little bit. Jumping ahead to the next we'll have this a little bit with the next the first special offer wine we have, which is the Bibendum, which I'll talk about this later too. But the Battle of Actium is located pretty near to Epirus, so we weren't able to get a wine that's right there, but that's the connection there. So to kind of pick up where Dana left off a little bit, we had with the Ptolemies, right? They're actually a Macedonian dynasty, which is interesting. Alexander the Great, these generals all came from Macedon, like what's now northern Greece, where we'll be going actually next summer. And these different kingdoms around Asia, Egypt, mainland Greece, they he didn't leave a succession plan in place, Alexander. So there was just sort of a squabble over the scraps of his empire. And Ptolemy was the most powerful of Alexander's generals when Alexander was alive, and he got the greatest prize, which was actually Egypt at that point. Was the richest of all the kingdoms in that time period in the Hellenistic Mediterranean world. Dana mentioned Alexander's body, so there's an interesting story about that. It was destined, we're told, there's a whole controversy about it, but we're told it was destined to go back to Greece. And so one of his other generals had it, and they were on the way, and Ptolemy stole the body and took it to Alexandria and buried it there. So it just conferred this a huge amount of legitimacy upon his kingdom as the sort of the successor kingdom to Alexander. And then, we went through this 300 years of history. That was 323 BCE that Alexander died. And then Cleopatra, as Dana mentioned, is in the very last part of the first century BCE. So 69 to 30. So it's about 300 years of history where they're kind of going through this. And we've touched on that in many different ways in a lot of our clubs, that period of history. But I think it's important to remember that this is a Greek dynasty. In other words, these people are speaking Macedonian Greek. Cleopatra was the first one of them to actually learn the Egyptian language, we're told. So, and to kind of, I mean, to really sort of understand the culture and the religion in a way that wasn't completely self-serving, I think, like just not sort of, putting her name on the buildings to get legitimacy, but actually to kind of understand the culture of which she was a part or which she was ruling over. So that's really interesting. So we'll kind of I want to talk about just a tiny bit, not to dig in too much about just the context with Rome, because it really does pervade the story. Most of our sources about Cleopatra are Roman, and most of them are negative as well. Almost all of them are negative, and that's the sort of the victor writes the history, right? So, um, in this time period, we had Julius Caesar was the most powerful Roman of his day. Cleopatra got into a relationship with him. There's a whole bunch of kind of colorful stories around that are told to us by Shakespeare, both in his play Julius Caesar and in the Antony and Cleopatra. And then later on, it's Mark Antony who she's involved with. So with Julius Caesar, it's a story of kind of her, seducing and managing to actually she ended up going to Rome with him, managing to kind of get the most powerful Roman of her day on her side. And then later on, the more famous romances, of course, with Antony. So we shared a lot of these stories in our write-ups, but one of them is I think particularly kind of fun is the one where she apparently they had a banquet and a contest over, who could have the most kind of impressive trick at the party, and she put a pearl into a glass of wine, and apparently it dissolved. And then she drank the glass of wine. So this has actually been tested out many times. And if you leave it in there long enough and it's enough vinegar, apparently the pearl will dissolve. So maybe one of those things where she staged the banquet and over a couple of days, and he saw her put the pearl in, and then, a couple of days later she drank it. But it's kind of one of those fun stories. And the two of them formed this, they called it the Inimitable Livers Drinking Society. So I think they enjoyed the partying, that kind of lifestyle. But as I mentioned, it's always important, I think, to remember the where these stories are coming from, which is hostile sources. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment when I get into the Battle of Actium, that sort of hostile tradition against Cleopatra. So, but turn it now to T, who's going to talk about the third one in our setting, which is the 2021
So
Saya Lo Colombier.
yes, so this wine, it's a blend of Tempranillo, Grenache, Cinsault, one third, one third, one third. Changes a little bit every year depending on the vintage, but pretty even. The amazing thing about this wine is the story of it is amazing. Rami and Sami Gonj, their family fled to France during the Lebanese Civil War in 1975. And while they were in France, the two brothers worked at View Telegraph, which is a really famous um, Chateauneuf-du-Pape producer in the Rhone Valley. And that's where they got the inspiration to make a Rhone-style blend, which is what this wine is. In 1990, once the Lebanese Civil War ended, Sami came back to Lebanon and they wanted to reclaim their family's holdings. So what he did was he bought one-way ticket. He flew he flew in and then he rented a Jeep and he bought an AK-47 and he drove to his family's holdings and was he basically slept on the roof of at night holding an AK-47 and during the day he was trying to rebuild the homes and all the destruction that happened within 15 years, 25 years, since they left. So and once people saw that, hey, we can't, just like take over your family's land, and that he was actually serious about holding on the land, these people who were squatting left, and then he started planting vines, putting the roof back on, putting up walls, etc. And so, yeah, and so they're making this wine. They try to farm organic whenever possible, and it's a classic Rhone style blend. You're gonna get a little plum, you're gonna get, a little like hint of spice, medium bodied. This is a wine that goes well with everything. Sausages on the grill, kebabs, stuff, grape leaves, etc. And it's an incredibly versatile wine.
Thanks, T. Yeah, and of course I mean it's sort of a rough time, I mean, to say the least, the understatement of the year in Lebanon at the moment with everything going on over there. So obviously our thoughts to
That's
um everybody in that region right now. It's pretty tragic. I mean, that you sort of think about we obviously picked out this wine before everything kind of escalated to the north there. recently, but yeah, I mean it's a spot that we've, spent some time as well. And
Mhm.
yeah, so this on a more serious note, that's you know, an interesting kind of correlation with what's going on there now is to have a kind of civil war and then people, there's livelihoods and there's vineyards and there's people's lives and things like that. So it's pretty, yeah, kind of sobering. We've just been sort of having that in the back of our mind as we're putting the tasting together as well. Um, so I'm just gonna kind of move on here, pick up the story where I left off a little bit with the Antony and Cleopatra. So I mean, this is one of those topics I mean, we could have written a book on each one of these, with each one of these wines, the segment that comes after, there's a book worth of material that people have written in movies and, as Dana mentioned, TV shows and all that of that sort of thing. So it's hard to kind of distill down to what we wanted to convey. But I think one of the events that really stands out, not just from the career of Cleopatra, but from Roman Hellenistic history, Egyptian history, is this Battle of Actium, which took place in 31 BCE. And in the setup to that, you had Antony. Antony and Cleopatra had formed this romance. Antony at this point was after there's a lot of history here, but Julius Caesar, as everyone knows, was assassinated 44 BCE, and that precipitated a long series of civil wars that gradually kind of ended up with the one man rule in Rome. So the fall of essentially the Roman Republic, kind of a quasi democratic system, if you will. And we ended up with one emperor who was the Emperor Augustus. But in that period of about 17 years, most people kind of identify 27 BCE as the year the Roman Empire began with the one person in charge. During that period of 17 years, you had constant civil war really between Mark Antony and his allies and Octavian, who became Augustus on the other side. And so Mark Antony was looking for allies, and that's kind of what led him to Cleopatra, really, in the beginning. And then before, I mean, people have different positions on whether or not their romance was quote unquote a real romance or more of a political arrangement. But I mean, I don't know. My personal opinion is that whatever brought them together, political expediency, they ended up kind of very much in love. That's my own opinion on the matter, just from what we do know. Just the way that they died, which I'll talk about in a minute, is kind of suggestive of that, I think. But anyway, so all of this civil war came to a head really at the Battle of Actium, which is in Western Greece, a bay there, pretty close to about as close as we could get with this wine that I just tasted, the Epilogus. And it was a naval battle between Octavian's forces and Antony's forces, but really it was Cleopatra's forces who were backing him, and it was a victory for Octavian. So the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, and this was what sort of decided that really really long conflict between these two great, um, essentially Roman powers, one of which had kind of become more of an Eastern style monarch really by this point, Antony. And after that, we get if anybody knows anything about Cleopatra, probably it's the story of her suicide back in Alexandria, where which Shakespeare tells us about, of course, in the play Antony and Cleopatra, but different versions of this, but something along the lines of her. They had this kind of, it gets kind of very, very Shakespearean, so it's hard to know the exact history of it, but um, he, you know, he thought she was already dead, so he killed himself, and then she saw him, and he wasn't quite dead, and then she had an asp, a snake, smuggled into her in a basket of figs. And the reason that she would do that is actually connected to one of the special offer wines, which I'm going to talk about, is that you did not want to be, if you were a foreign leader conquered by the Romans, you did not want to be taken alive and taken back to Rome, because they would parade you publicly through the streets in a triumph and then execute you publicly. So it was this really
We've seen that a couple
horrible
times.
humiliation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also in the ancient context, like a suicide is a noble for most cultures. It's definitely the Romans and Greeks. It's a noble way to die. It's a non-humiliating way to die. So that's why she committed suicide, right? We don't know exactly how it happened, And then just to kind of touch back on the idea of sources, which I talked about, the I mean Octavian, of course, won this war and really wiped out the other side of the story of Cleopatra and Antony, even more Antony than Cleopatra. But because they were so connected, anything favorable to Antony pretty much didn't make it through ancient, the ancient sources to us. So we have like almost nothing positive about him. Plutarch wrote a biography of him much later in the second century CE, and we have of course, a range of other sources about this period. A lot of sources about Cleopatra, but it's really hard to disentangle the bias against her from kind of what actually happened in these events. So that's something always as an ancient historian or as a modern historian, kind of looking back on these time periods that are so distant from us, we always have to kind of keep in mind where our very limited sources are coming from and whose kind of agenda is behind that. So something to think about there. And this is a sarcophagus here that's depicting the Battle of Actium. So in kind of a miniature form. So Dana, did you want to weigh in there on something? I think I cut you off.
No, no, not at all. No,
Okay.
I think you were right on it. And yeah, we'll get into exactly this sort of like idea of the image of Cleopatra and this the way she's been portrayed historically and even up into the modern day a little bit later. So yeah, I was just
Okay, cool.
with you. Yeah.
So with that, I'll turn. So the connection here, just to kind of explain, you're like, wait, whoa, Cyprus. So T is going to talk about this one from Cyprus, but in the write-up, if you have the write-ups, you'll kind of see the connection where there was a series of land grants that Antony made to Cleopatra, that she was providing him with money and resources, and he was basically kind of auctioning off, if you will, various chunks of the Roman Empire at this point. And because he kind of could slash couldn't, and that was one of the pieces that Octavian was able to use against him in terms of propaganda back in Rome. Was like, wait a minute, he's giving Roman territory to an Egyptian queen, essentially. So Cyprus was included in one of those land grants. So that's the connection here. So that's why we threw this. We really love this wine. Wanted to feature it. So. Oh, there's Arania. She's coming in now. So admit her
Hey,
into
all right.
the waiting room. So
Hey, Jeff, I realized
straight
what I
from
was.
Greece. Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
Oh, I realized what I was reacting to was actually you were talking about the being taken back to Rome and being paraded in front
Oh
and
yeah.
feeling humiliated. Yeah, those of you who are sharp-eyed and remember our wines of Gaul, Vercingetorix, and
Oh
like some
yeah.
of the folks that actually had that fate, right? So putting it into a little bit of context, right? That absolutely is not the way you want to go. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's what I was jumping in
Oh
on.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, T, take it away.
All right. Yeah, so our fourth wine is the 2021 Vina Ardua Apis from Cyprus. This wine is very unique. It comes from 120-year-old vines grown at 1,300-meter elevation in Cyprus. Just to give a little context, if you ever go to Napa, most vines that you're going to see are going to be at most 30 to 40 years old because after 40 years old, the vines don't produce as much fruit. And so as a result, a lot of winemakers will pull out the vines and then replant them. Um, Here, it's generational family that owns it. And the beauty of really old vines is that while they produce less fruit, the fruit that they produce are incredibly intense in terms of flavor and terroir, in terms of minerality. Um, this is grown on sandstone soils um, and is aged 30 days in in stainless steel before putting into barrels. And the grape is Marlborough. Marlborough means just dark. So they're not quite sure whether this wine is, it could be, what kind of grape is it? They haven't done genetic testing yet. I mean, is it like Marlborough Daphne? Is it, Marlborough, etc.? This wine actually is very, very intense, in its flavor. You get a lot of dark fruit, stewed plums, strawberries. Um, it has the color of almost like a Nebbiolo or Pinot Noir, but it has the intensity of a really a Zinfandel or Merlot. So this is a wine that is going to be good with heavier foods, any lamb, steak, etc. And it's real. And also, oh, I forgot to say, Apis means steep because the vineyards, in addition to being at 1,300 meters elevation, the vineyards are 60 degrees on a slope. So it is incredibly hard to farm, incredibly hard to harvest. So this is definitely a labor of love for these winemakers.
And Dana, did we have a historical connection with Dana in Cyprus as well? Did you manage to get to this area of the island, Dana, when you were there, or?
I did actually. Yeah, I spent about maybe 6 months in Cyprus doing research back in the day. And Nicosia is a remarkable place, both in terms of all of the the history, the nature, the viticulture. The city today is essentially the bounds are a giant Venetian round fortress structure that's been cut in half after the Turks invaded in 78. This is the famous Green Line that separates the city. It's still another divided capital, right? Like a couple others in the world. Absolutely beautiful country and absolutely wonderful people. And we're seeing some movement in that part of the world. It's easier now to move from northern Cyprus to southern Cyprus and back and forth. So hopefully that'll be a bright spot in what otherwise is kind of, as you were saying earlier, Jeff, some troubled times for the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. I also wanted to throw out too that I love that so many wines and we're going to see this also with some of the special offer wines are pure varietals of grapes that maybe you've never tried before. Maybe you've never tried Sabebo, maybe you've never tried Marlborough. Yeah, and so these are great ways of kind of getting acclimated with some of these lesser known varietals, which is super fun to
Yeah,
do.
maybe any of these
Yeah,
varieties.
right.
I mean, yeah,
Totally, exactly. I
yeah.
don't think I have not had a lot of Muscat of Alexandria, and I've definitely never had dry styles before. So yeah, these are just as instructive for us as we're going through and tasting and going through and selecting the best versions of what we want to present to you guys. Um, and it's always a pleasure to have that opportunity. So yeah.
So who are we looking at here, Dana?
Oh man. Okay. So this kind of rounds it out in terms of our content for this month's club. I think one of the things that's really interesting and especially not to get political and not to talk about, the fact that we have now a woman running on the Democratic ticket, the emphasis on female rulers and image is something that, whether we're talking about, what Kamala Harris wore at the debate, or we're talking about, Cleopatra, image is so closely tied to powerful women, and that's been the case, since late, antiquity up until the present day. This question that often gets raised, what did Cleopatra actually look like? And so much of that is tied to this intrinsic question that Jeff has laid out, which is our sources. Our sources are coming from, as Jeff said, yeah, the majority of them are hostile Roman sources. We have, for example, um, Pliny describing Cleopatra as a meretrix regina, and anytime that you hear me speak Latin, you can see me looking at Jeff because I'm going to ask him to correct me. We were talking about this a little bit, but essentially, right, Jeff, we decided harlot queen was the best translation of that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we went with in the write-up. Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea of Cleopatra as a seducer, as a femme fatale who uses her sexuality to basically bend the wills of powerful men, Caesar, like Mark Antony, is something that definitely all of these Roman sources picked up. Horace called her, a monster, and Lucian referred to her as Egypt's shame. Um, Plutarch spends a lot of time talking about how she looked. He actually says in Life of Antony, which Jeff just referenced, he says, for her beauty, we're told it was not in itself incomparable, nor such that it should strike those who saw her. Um, and the images that we have of Cleopatra, um, there's been a lot of press about how homely she looks, whether it's the few remaining marble busts that we have, or images like this one where we see Cleopatra depicted on the left-hand side of your screen. A lot of emphasis on her nose, particularly. Um, and this idea that she had these like aquiline features and this big nose, and that she was homely and this and that. Um, Interestingly, there's been a lot of art historical analysis of um, essentially Roman artistic traditions of married couples. And we should say that, to Jeff's point, this was a marriage. This was a union that produced children between Antony and Cleopatra. This was a real thing, and of course, had political expediency. But as part of that tradition, you often would depict men and women in a similar style. So there's some thinking that the reason in this case, these are two sides of the same coin. This is a silver tetradrachma from Antioch, that depicts Antony and Cleopatra, and that basically by showing them in the same way with similar features, you're actually projecting harmony and a sense of union. So yeah, we really take the track of looking at Cleopatra's achievements, looking at the fact that she was a breaker of convention, looking at the fact that she was a singular individual, whether she was a woman, whether she was beautiful, whether she was not, and letting that speak volumes more than any image ever could. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
without question, she's the most powerful and interesting woman in the at least the known world to the Mediterranean, folks
Mhm.
and the Near East, Middle East in that time period. So
Mhm.
definitely, I 100% agree with that assessment, Dana, with the way that the coins are. This coin in particular is depicting her to look sort of like Antony, who
Mhm.
Antony looks a little funny in that picture too, with the sort of, I mean, he's extremely square, right? His neck and his
Do you know, Jeff,
military
there's
man.
there's some
Um,
background to that actually. Like that actually, Antony's lineage, he claimed lineage to Heracles,
yeah.
and that sort of that
Hmm.
what you're seeing, that wedge-shaped face, and Plutarch talks about that as well, and saying that that is actually his admirable traits that goes back to his to his heroic legacy. So again, we conceptions of beauty, they vary and change over time, and to kind of apply them to the modern day is always a fraught exercise, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
and in their parties, they had this. I mean, with their along with their romance and the kind of mythology of them. I mean, literal mythology of them is they had themselves kind of dressed up as initially it was Dionysus and Aphrodite,
Mhm.
right? It was this kind of we're divine. There was always a melding in the, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean world, of human and divine, which the Romans didn't. That was kind of anathema to the Romans initially, was the fact that a person could be a kind of semi-divine figure, like Heracles, but in the Eastern Mediterranean, that was just sort of how they did things. And
Mhm.
so Alexander, right, was a Greek, but then when he went to the East, he was able to become a become a god. And there's a whole backstory on that too, which we'll be focusing on when we kind of redo our. We did an Alexander the Great club a few years ago with our old format. We couldn't spend as much time because we didn't have as much room.
Mhm.
We'll be going back into that. But I think, and then later on, she got associated with Isis, the goddess Isis, too.
Mhm.
And so there's a whole package there of interesting information as well about this kind of
Well, And
Yeah.
to your original point, Jeff, when you talk about we're talking about Macedonian rulers, right, with Greek roots that have that's part of their repertoire, right? That's part of their idea of, engendering power, and it's something that's anathema to Rome, but something that's very, on point for Ptolemaic rulers, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's propaganda as well for Octavian Augustus, right? What to
Mhm.
say this, look at her, look at him. I mean, look at this
Mhm.
Roman who's behaving like an Eastern monarch. I think that
There
was
you go. Yeah.
um
Orientalism.
king was a dirty word in Rome, even though they ended up with an emperor. It was a dirty word. The word Rex, king. So it's kind of interesting. That was really politically useful for Octavian that Antony was hanging out with an Egyptian queen
Mhm.
at this point in time. Yeah.
Just to add, Jeff, it's interesting in Chinese culture. People say when two couples are have been together for a long time, they start looking like each other, like dressing similarly, wearing similar glasses, etc.
They
I
get the
So,
think
mat they get the matching luggage and the matching aloha shirt. We see that a lot here.
exactly.
Yeah, I think the Western equivalent though is with people and their pets, though. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that that
Yeah,
plays it's dogs
yeah.
and
Best
ponies.
in show. Yeah.
Uh, Dana, just want to ask a question. Just with the Netflix Cleopatra, which I haven't seen myself, but there was some controversy with the casting that she was more African and darker. I heard there was some internet stuff in Egypt where they
Oh
thought she was
yeah.
too dark. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a big blow up. Adele James, I think, is the name of the actress that played her. And the Egyptian government actually stepped in and had a statement, a press release stating, that Cleopatra, was Greek and she wasn't black. And I think this just kind of underscores the the power of the idea of Cleopatra, and even in antiquity, up to the modern day, right? She's occupied this liminal space where her supporters and her detractors can really sort of, play and, appropriate and defile those ideas. And I think that's exactly what we saw. I think what we saw with this recent Netflix thing is no different than what we saw, in the time of Octavian and Antony and Cleopatra. Um, I think when you have exceptional people that rise to power, they inevitably come under scrutiny. And Cleopatra, for all of these reasons, has struck a chord that just continues to resonate up into the modern day. Yeah, so it's a good point.
Cool. So with that, let's move on to our two special offer wines. So the first of these is the one I've referenced this a couple of times already in the course of the talk tonight, but this is the 2021 Domaine de la Grande Colline Bibendum Rouge, Rhone Valley, France. So you may be wondering, maybe wondering, why do we have a wine from the Rhone Valley in France in a club about Cleopatra with no real known connection between France and Egypt during this time period. Rome, of course, there's a connection there, but not Egypt per se. The reason we picked this wine is I actually saw the white version of this wine in a wine shop a while back, a year or two ago, and I was like, oh, Bibendum. And I'm like, well, I'm probably one of the only people that's ever walked in this wine shop that knows what that's a reference to. And it's a reference to a famous poem by the poet Horace, who was a contemporary of Augustus, actually worked in Augustus's court, sort of, as a kind of official or unofficial court poet, depending on whose opinion you take. Um, and this is a reference to a poem that Horace wrote in which the first line is Nunc est bibendum, which means now it's time to drink. And the poem is actually about Cleopatra and the Battle of Actium, which Octavian, of course, won over, or his general. He wasn't really involved, but his general, Agrippa, won over Cleopatra and Antony. So it's kind of a neat, I don't know. I mean, I have to assume it does say on the actually on the foil Nunc est bibendum. So it wasn't like I was just making this connection up. That's where comes from. And so we picked this wine because of that connection to Actium, which we've highlighted all of the significance of that battle. But it's actually a really cool wine in and of itself. So this is a kind of passion project by a famous, now famous, kind of rising star, former sommelier, now winemaker named Jonathan Jacquard, who works in Cornas, which is a highly touted region of the Northern Rhone, growing Syrah. I mean, these are $100 plus, wines, hard to get allocated wines. Really, really amazing Syrah. And he's taken over this winery. Actually, it was a Japanese winemaker, I think, that was running it before. Domaine de la Grande Colline, who went back to Japan, and sort of they need somebody to step in. So Jonathan Jacquard stepped in, and he's taken it over. He's, of course, he's doing all of these amazing Syrahs, and has kind of regularized their winemaking process. So it just, I think they had some kind of, it was a bottle variation and things like that. And it's doing an amazing, that winery is doing an amazing thing, but he's also working with these two wines, the red and the white, which I mentioned. And these grapes are grown actually south of here, quite a bit south of the Southern Rhone region in Saint-Gervais, actually in the Gard region, which Nîmes is the capital. So if you've been to France, or even if you haven't, you probably know the Pont du Gard, which is the most famous aqueduct to survive from the Roman period. So it's an interesting, like, it's a heavily Romanized area, this area of France, a lot of Roman ruins and whatnot. So anyway, he's growing 100% Cinsault. Dana mentioned like single variety wines. I don't know of that many just kind of pure Cinsault wines that you can try from France that are in, like, this one is a stainless steel tank where you get a pure expression of the wine without any kind of interference from oak or any other grapes or anything like that. So it's a cool wine to see kind of what Cinsault does on its own. And really, it's grown biodynamically, organically, so all natural yeast, whole cluster, basically very low intervention wine. And it's kind of a high, sort of a premium wine in that kind of natural wine category, I guess is what you could call it. So I just tried this yesterday for the first time, but I really, really liked it. As I think we wrote in the write-up, recommend letting this thing open up a little bit, has some kind of not necessarily for me off-putting tones, but definitely some things that will blow off after about half an hour or so, to kind of let the fruit shine in it. It's a wine that has kind of a lighter body, which I'm not that familiar with all the different expressions of Sanso, but it feels kind of a little bit lighter, but then it has a really nice, rich mouthfeel and a really complex, kind of longer aftertaste for me is kind of what I experienced with it.
Yeah, to add to what
Yeah.
Jeff was saying, like from the Rhone Valley, you're always gonna get Grenache or Syrah, or in the Northern Rhone, it's mostly Syrah, and in the south, it's a blend of Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre. It's really rare to find just a pure Cinsault.
Mhm.
So this is incredibly unique, and it's really nice, high tone. You get a lot of blue fruits to it. Honestly, I've never quite had a wine like this from the Rhone Valley.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love the, like, I mean, the Sanso that I have had, kind of full Sanso is really spicy, I feel like. And this one to me had both like white pepper and black pepper. Like, it just feels like something has, I would just like immediately think like let's grab like a, pepperoni and Italian sausage pizza. You know what I mean? Like, with this kind of wine, it has really good food pairing wine, really good backbone, really good acidity. So
Yeah,
really enjoyed that we put this one in the special offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has like some floral to
yeah,
it too. It's really complex and interesting. Yeah.
yeah. This is the kind of wine that if you were Jamie, you want to get a Colossus pizza with.
That's right.
Yeah. Or anyone in our Spokane contingent. Yeah, we can't get that sort of thing anywhere else that I'm aware of. So
I think it's illegal
kind
in
of pizza that
California.
won't fit in your door.
I'm
So
pretty sure. I'm pretty sure there's a law against it. I think it's been.
yeah. California regulates that sort of thing. Yeah.
That's yeah. Too much cheese.
Yeah. Red tape. Yeah.
Right.
So we really like this wine. So with that, while you're enjoying that, we'll turn it over to Dana, which has who has the other one of our special offers this time.
Thanks, Jeff. I know we got 4 minutes left in the hour, so I'll keep it brief. I do want to say though that yeah, you're mentioning Nîmes and Rome and wine. We've touched on this a lot, but yeah, this fantastic Roman. You can actually still go and see the corrida performed in like the Roman amphitheaters in Nîmes. So remarkable stuff. All right, so our final special offer, wine number two. This is a 2021 Kukos Amphora from IKEA Greece. Again, just like we were saying, 100% Maro Daphne. And I got all excited about this with the Maro Daphne because, sharp-eyed AWG followers will remember our club talking about Demeter and how inversions of the Greek gods and heroes often are like black Demeter. So Mavro Daphne means black Daphne. Unfortunately, well, there's a little bit of like a little bit of interesting, mythological connections, right, with this wine. Mara Daphne it's interesting. It is an indigenous varietal, but it was first made famous actually by this guy Gustav Klaus, who came to the region. And we're talking about Kukos Winery. This is in again the Achaia region. This is about 20 miles south of the city of Patras, which is where Antony and Cleopatra actually wintered and assembled their forces before the Battle of Actium, which Jeff was discussing earlier. So that's our connection, right, with this wine particularly. But yeah, Gustav Klaus came and in the 1850s, he basically took this wine and started making a sweet dessert wine out of it, fortified wine. This is a very different version of that. This comes to us from the Kukos Winery. It's a newer operation. Two brothers, Pangiotis and Konstantinos Kukos. They founded this winery in the 1990s, and they're based largely on focusing on organic cultivation, not biodynamic. They still use things like sulfur and copper and sort of modern winemaking techniques, but they don't use pesticides. They use manure from animals and that sort of thing for a generally organic production. And this grape is really interesting. So the connection to the reason it's called Maro Daphne is that well, there are a couple of different versions of this. Some say that Gustav Klaus noted that the berries resembled the berries of the laurel, and Daphne, the mythological nymph Daphne, is famous for, at least in a couple of different versions. I think the most famous is probably a later source, Ovid, that talks about how the god Apollo insulted Cupid and essentially said, little boy, why are you messing around with a young man's arms? Like, why do you are he's insulting his archery. And so to get back at him, Cupid strikes Apollo with a golden tipped arrow, which makes him fall instantly in love with the nymph Daphne, who's actually the daughter of Pentheus, a river god, and it strikes Daphne with a lead tipped arrow, making her completely appalled by Apollo and wanting nothing to do with him. So Apollo pursues her, is seducing her, and at the last second she's cornered. She prays to her father, this river god, please, please spare me from this fate. And her wish is granted. She's transformed into the laurel tree. And Apollo, still enamored of her, throws his hands around her. This is in Ovid's Metamorphoses, for those of you keeping note. At least his version of it. There's a bunch of versions. But the connection here is those of you who were actually out traveling on this last trip and were up in Delphi, right? You know that the Stephanos, the crown given to victors of the Pythian Games, the 4-year games that took place at Delphi every year, were actually given laurel crowns. And laurel was this, famously significant plant, especially with connections with Apollo and with Delphi. So anyway, this wine is unique though in that it departs from that tradition that Gustav Klaus put in place of making sweet wines. This is a completely dry amphora, delicious wine that really is let's try it here. it's this kind of old world style. And you know, I think we mentioned this in the write-ups too, that this is one that also needs to open up in order to fully appreciate it. Fermented entirely in amphora. But yeah, these wonderful notes of, you know, dried herbs and boysenberry and black plum, black currant. One of those wines that is just incredibly unique. Motto definitely is a very versatile grape in that it can do these sweet style wines and also present just an absolutely beautiful dry red that is really great across the board. So with that, I think it actually brings us to the end of our tasting. I think it brings us to the end of the content, and I'll turn it back to Jeff.
Yeah, so I mean, we always kind of make this pitch, but if you're interested in any of the wines that we've tasted in the, if you're in the club and you liked any of the wines from the club, you want to reorder them, or if you love either of the special offers and want more of them, or if you didn't get the special offers the first time, want more of them, we'll typically add these to the next club shipment, but because we're now quarterly, one of us is likely to be down at the locker sometime in between and can make an extra delivery. So if we put them with your club, you can get up to now we need to update the slide. It should be 8 extra bottles, which makes up a case with the 4 in the club. We can ship those with GLS for no extra charge. And if you're anywhere else, we can add $5 a bottle. So some of these wines are really hard to get. So if you're somewhere else and you want to get them, this I think is still really reasonable with the club discount. We'll give you 15% off every single wine too. So that's kind of the corporate pitch side of things. And then if we have some little time, if anyone has any questions they want to ask about anything regarding the wines or um any of the content or anything like that, we have a couple of
Absolutely.
minutes now too. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take it up.
Just a reminder since Orania is here that tentatively save the date, Northern Greece next year, July 21st to July 30th. Um, just let us know if you're interested and we can easily reserve your spot. Also, if you're going to Greece outside of those times, if you want the greatest tour guide and someone to give you advice and show you around, please contact Orania. You can find her at Margot Wine Routes online. And
mhm.
you can also send us an email and we can give you her email and contact information.
Mhm.
Well said. Yeah.